All right, so welcome to the first episode, or what I've decided to be the first episode of Writing from the Edge of the Veil, or Writings from the Edge of the Veil. And I thought I'd start with something really simple, like the nature of reality and the cosmology of the world I'm building in Veil's Edge. Yeah, no, it's not that simple, but it's fun. And I like to, my intention is to end each episode with like a little writing nudge. And I don't really have one for this because this piece was actually recorded yesterday morning while I was musing about, like, I was unpacking my evolving thoughts about this world that I'm building and how I want to represent the nature of reality itself. And not just, plucking things of what could be and like, this sounds kind of cool and this wasn't done before and I haven't seen, just sort of reaching for things that don't feel or resonate as I don't know if the word is truth, but maybe that could be it. And I don't mean like when we're writing fiction, we want to work from the substrate of all that is, of all that could be, of pure possibility to, create something that is a unique lens, even though we can draw from certain tropes, certain, roles or things. We need to draw from things that are familiar, right? Because then we can speak a similar language. But then at the same time, we are becoming multilingual. And I talk about this in this episode, I think. And so as we learn the new language, things that we already know are put together in a brand new way. Or, we can even go as far as to imagine what has never been in our personal consciousness before. And it can be quite novel and unique and, even create things that are put together in such a way that it's like a brand new formula, I suppose. I'm not going to get too far into that because I talk about this already in the episode. But I usually come up with well, not usually. I want to give you like a writing nudge at the end of each episode. So I'm going to give you one now, okay? Because I know I forgot, or I didn't, I neglected to do that at the end because this was initially a blog post for the website, veilsedgebooks.com. So you can listen to like a lot of blog posts, and the blog posts are intended to take you down the creation of those particular books. And this website, or sorry, this podcast is going to be some of that, because my art and my work I use as examples. And, at some point, I really hope that there is a really large and engaged and inspired following of this podcast and the books themselves as a, launch pad for your own inspired expression. So it was initially a blog post. So what I want to nudge you into writing as you listen, take notes of what you think about all of this. Write about what reality is to you at the end. And I'm not saying, regurgitate my ideas, but anytime I release something creatively, or a lot of artists or writers or whoever, people that are enjoying, expressing in their own space. The point is to connect with people and inspire them into their own expression of creativity, right? So I hope you enjoy it, and it's kind of a wild ride. Some of you might be really familiar with some of the things, concepts, ideas that I'm playing with in here. And some of you might be like, what? I never thought of that before. I'm just starting out, man. I'm just starting out, Carla. I just want to know, how to write a good character, or, start a story at all. But we just jump right in. I just jump right in this podcast. So hope you enjoy it. See you on the flip side. So I am a dreamscape psychonaut, and you're going to hear me use those words a lot if you are reading the books or if you're listening to my podcasts or in any of my groups. I think that the dreamscape is just as real as the waking world. And it's funny because I have a history, a deep history of writing about my dreams and thinking about them and contemplating them. And I don't even really know where that came from. Like I was probably, I don't know, somewhere in my teens. Well, I know I was in my teens. I don't know if I was an older teen or mid teens or whatever, but I started writing about my dreams because I've always, maybe not always, but since then I remember being a very vivid dreamer. And my dreams like were so colorful and I found so much meaning in them. And I was starting to do my own interpretation, although I did kind of go down the garden path a little bit of like what other people's interpretation might be. But really just kind of, I was writing them down just to capture the story. And then also as I did that, I would sort of like just kind of touch on, in my mind or whatever, before moving on with my day, what that might mean. And I think about some of those dreams still to this day. I have all of my journals that I used to write them down. I would write them longhand. Now I actually just verbalize them as an audio, or I do voice to text, which is really useful too in that process, because for me, it flows better for me to do it that way than it does for me to write it down. That's too slow for me. The way that the insights keep coming to me. So I was doing that when I was young, and I have no idea why I started doing it. I was talking to my husband today or a couple days ago about that, and my daughter. I was like, I don't know where this came from, why I started writing about my dreams, but I just wanted to and kept a journal. Somebody must have suggested something like, a diary when I was younger, because I used to keep a diary when I was like grade 8. Actually, you know what? It was given to me by someone. And it was one of those old-fashioned diaries that had like a lock on it. Like, which is really interesting. But I'm not going to even go there. Like why we lock up our innermost thoughts and feelings. I don't know. Interesting. Anyway, that's something that just popped in my head. But I started writing about these dreams, and then so fast forward. Okay. So then I started to return to that practice of at least, like writing them down. I always contemplate my dreams, and I kind of say, yeah, I can even lucid dream. It's like people think it's a superpower to be able to like manipulate what happens in your dreams. And actually that's cool. And I was exploring that for a while too. And I've done it. I've like actually been awake in the dream, like conscious that I'm dreaming, and I'm still dreaming. I'm asleep. I'm not actually like coming out of the dream or daydreaming. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm dreaming. I can like try this on and take it off, try it on, take it off, But I also think that there's such richness to be had in just being the observer, being along for the ride, And then when you quote unquote wake up, or, like you can reflect on what that wisdom was without you manipulating it. So I think there's like a value in all of that, because this is really just a realm of play. And so I've been thinking about that a lot, and I'm revisiting Robert Moss's work. Because I started, going down that road when I realized that I didn't just, the crow might mean something in your dream, for instance, but that's only because we've agreed upon this symbology, like this symbol of the crow meaning XYZ. It's not because it actually has to mean that for you, and what your dreams mean for you. And that's why it's super important to interpret your own dreams, is because you have your own lexicon, and we share some of it, with others. Like sun rising is hopeful, and the sun setting is like, oh wow, that's the end of the day, and all these things that symbols can represent for us. But they are interpreted slightly differently depending on our background, our circumstance, whether or not we believe it, whether we bought in, whether, like what culture we're from, like things that we've been taught and not taught, like things we knew and didn't know. And sometimes things come up in dreams that we didn't consciously know, but we picked up somehow in the ether, and it's part of the collective consciousness that can be revealed to us in a dream. And so, okay, so what I'm talking about is really like the lexicon or the language that we can draw from, or I like to say the word substrate too, because it's like the substrate of, there is a substrate of all that is, and there's also a substrate of all we know. And so I really love, when Robert Moss is talking about the imagination. And a lot of people talk about imagination, like Michael Meade, Joseph Campbell, they're mythologists and storytellers, and all kinds of cultures all over the world, like imagination is like highly revered as a creation point. Like we've forgotten in a lot of Western cultures that, in our Western culture, that imagination, if we can't imagine anything, there's no innovation, there's no growth, there's no newness, there's nothing that can actually be manifest if we can't imagine it first, or don't imagine it first, right? So we're just sort of stuck in this quote unquote practical, not the imaginal. We want to produce, but really all we're doing is reproducing when we're stuck in the practical, not when that's all there is, of what we seemingly think we know. So to create anything new, to be continually evolving and expanding, which is the point of life itself, creating, is to be in this creative space of the imagination. So they've even called, and I think actually Robert Moss calls it the imaginal realm. And even in science, there's the imaginal cell, right? Like where all possibility exists. So it's like a stem cell, and it doesn't know what it's going to be until it's called into action. And I need you as a new heart cell. I need you as, a blood cell. I need you as a brain cell. And they're called into action and are created it from all that is into what is needed or wanted or desired or, at the moment. So so let's go to the imaginal realm. So these thoughts are actually helping me to create this cosmology and define it, so I feel it, and I've been exploring it, and I'm really, the whole point of a story is to tell the story, right? Through all these different examples of what the story could be, So by doing that, telling all these characters, like events and how they relate and how they bump up with each other, how they help each other grow, that's all part of the bigger story. All of these smaller heroes' journeys, smaller, and when I don't mean insignificant, I just mean little points of the all tell the complete picture of the whole story. And I don't just mean like, creating chapters, which I do, chapters in that story, but also as representatives, each chapter holds the entire meaning of the whole story itself. So one love story teaches you about love. One story about motherhood teaches you about motherhood. One story about fatherhood, one story about brotherhood, sisterhood, and without the gender, like those are just examples I'm coming up with that, I'm not talking man, woman, I'm talking about like human experience, those are just examples. So what was I saying? Okay, so while I'm exploring this dreamscape, and I have actually a drawing I did a year and a half ago when I first started, pulling together this world, building this world. I was, okay, there's this like cosmoscape, and it's sort of representative like the space, with the earth as part of it. So it's like everything. So but then I'm like, okay, well, in the cosmoscape, there's like the universe that's bigger. It's like everything that was already made manifest. But then I think, I've never really heard of this discussed this way before, but outside of that universe is everything that is. It's like that could be everything. That's the imaginal realm, I would say, maybe even like beyond that. Or is the imaginal realm only in this like manifest human, But I don't think so. I think it's beyond the physical body. This is the imaginal realm. And then within that imaginal realm, I was like, okay, so now, and then there's the imaginal realm as a substrate of everything that could possibly exist. And then in the dreamscape is where those, each individual, or where you can play in that playground of imagination, right? And then whatever you play with, you can, and however you take that or interpret it, or if you pay attention to it at all, that becomes manifest, in the manifest reality, the manifest realm, this density, this embodied density. Yeah. And so we start with this substrate of all that is, and then we create our universe through imagining what it could be. And sometimes people are stuck, like in what actually already exists, and then there's nothing new being created, right? Unless you allow yourself to be in the creative space, which is the imaginal realm. And so this is what art's all about. This is what, even chop wood, carry water, the practical stuff of just making fire and taking care of things, and, building a fence, like taking care of of children and all the practical things. That's still a creative process of sustaining life and nurturing life, and leaving that space to be able to create and keep creating the next moment. Even we're always creating. We're even creating the next moment, the next thought. So I love that. So when I was moving down that, I was like, okay, I'm really refining this cosmology of this world, because I'm like, okay, if we start with that, the imaginal, and then from that, the dreamscape is actually, a way to play without, whatever seeming consequences of, like, let's say dying for, in the physical body, and then, like all of those sorts of things, that you can't actually physically die in the dreamscape, but you can play with what that might be like, and you can feel it and experience it. And then you can, use that as wisdom, or I don't want to use the word use, terrible. Anyway, so that becomes wisdom, and it's like the lullaby, which is like preparing for the little death, you don't actually have to die, if that makes sense. You don't have to die to experience death, or at least, have some kind of taste of what that might be. And it's all about sense making. It's all about meaning making. It's all about, also serendipity and seeing synchronicities and connections. And you put all that together, and that's the web of wisdom, that catches us from free fall. Free falling, like in confusion and no sense, nonsense. And you fall into that web of wisdom. So, okay, so then I move into this cosmology. So there's like a bunch of things that like I call purposes. You can call them roles, I guess, of each character that's in the book. And some of them have a few, some of them are really focused on one. Some of them grow into their, true genius of what that purpose is. Lots of different things, but there are some major players in this part of the actual building of the world itself. And they're really representative of what each of us actually do. Like we each create our own reality, which is part of, it was one of the overarching themes that we've come to understand, is that we all create our own reality, all these small R realities. And it's not even a reality of even the next person sitting beside us, because all of our perspectives are so different. And we're all looking at the one, that we're all part of, but from different angles, right? That center point, we're all looking at it different angles. And the reason for that is so that we all contribute to this whole question of what am I? Well, I am, but what's that mean? So we bring meaning to it through our stories. All right. Okay. So, so I've created, I guess, purposes or roles or, names for these for each character, for some of these characters. And the one that sort of moves in the imaginal realm, they are the ones that are working in the substrate of dreams. Even though they're manifest, even though they're physical bodies. And there's a couple characters. Arcturus is one of them. He's more of the cosmic, kind of character. And also Kilo, his name actually means daydreamer. And so they learn how to work in this substrate of the imaginal realm. They did instinctually, but the more aware they are and conscious of that power that they have and are able to define it a little better, not analyze and pick it apart and this whole left brain kind of dissection, fragmentation, they realize they know how to bring it together. Okay, so they see the parts but recognize the whole. I got to turn this off. All right, so they are the architects. And there's another book that uses the word builders, and I actually I think that's interesting. I'm not going to steal that, but I don't know if it's exactly the same concept, but I think it has similarities, I think. But I like the word architects. And so they create the structure, but it's not static. They're consistently and continuously redoing things and changing things and building new ones out of the imaginal realm through the playground of the dreamscape. And then has the potential that's the substrate from which all the dreamers, who's every character, every human being, all the dreamers to pull from. And so there is this ability, each innate, divinity of each character to be able to be an architect. And so they teach that, they embody it, they encourage it, they steward it, they lighthouse it. And so they are the architects, but they're not the only ones, and they don't want to be the only ones, like gods, So then we have that happening, and then the story comes in, right, where the dreamers are creating these stories, and some don't realize it. They tell the stories in their heads. I mean, even in practical life, we can think about this. Like, what stories are we telling ourselves? What is my myth? What are the myths I'm telling myself as in like falsity? And what's the myth I'm telling myself as far as like the divinity of like my life? This is a myth. This is like goes down as legend. This is like the metaphor of me. This is the story of me. And that's the myth I'm talking about, capital M myth. And so we all tell these stories. We're all storytellers in a way. We all have a narrator within our psyche. We all have, things that we tell ourselves about, like our future and our past, and we believe them. We tell each other these stories. But what we're learning here, and what part, like my books are, when I'm playing with them in my books, and part of the, I guess, message or theme, one of the messages or themes is that we are all creating our own stories, and we're the antagonist, we are the protagonist, we are writing it ourselves as we are reading it, and as we're experiencing it, we're at the same time writing it. We have the pen in our hands. We can erase and delete and rewrite and reshape and learn new language, a new lexicon. We can expand and we can write new chapters. We can edit. We have all of that. that power to do every single one of those things. And it's not a power over. It's not an aggressive power. It is like, I don't know how to explain it. I have no words for that. I have to come up with words for that. So as we do that, we have representative characters that actually embody this whole, like, the role of the story. Well, first, this was cool. I kind of came up with this when I was writing chapters about when Kilo and Shiraz in book 1, when they go back to visit where Yara, their mother, was born. And it's like on the coast and it's cold, and there's a lot of like imagery of, Celtic roots, and sort of being cold to the bone, but also being like a very stoic people, where they don't need a lot of like frillies, and they don't miss it because they don't need it, and there's nothing to feel sorry for. It's just they live, but there's still a lot of like like lots of love. It's not a coldness. It's a satisfaction, a deep satisfaction, and there are ships and lighthouses and all kinds of imagery like that. And so when I was exploring that, I was thinking about the storyteller, because this is it's only the second storyteller that shows up in the books. The first one opens up the series with a story, and then so it's Finn, and I'm like, okay, well, he's a storyteller. He's young. He's just learning. He's a young boy. He's 15 in these scenes, and but he's already this natural storyteller. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. There's a difference. I was like, well, am I going to call them story weavers? Are they storytellers? Are they story keepers? Are they fire keepers? And I thought, oh, there's a different layer. There's a different meaning to each of these roles. And so we have the story. So now that we've got these architects and all the dreamers that can create from the substrate that the architects are creating, and the dreamers can move into the role of architect. And then we've got this aspect of the story maker. And so maybe the architects are the story makers. We could call them that too. But so the architect creates the substrate, and the story maker creates the story from that. Okay? So the story makers create the story from that substrate, the architecture, the building blocks. And then the story maker, the next role would be the story weaver, is to weave together all of those individual stories. And this is where you see connection points between all the characters and all the events, and you start to see like, oh my God, that never would have happened had that thing not been planted 30 years before. That seed, that tree wouldn't have been in chapter 4 had it not been planted in chapter 1. That baby would not have been born. Those people would not have met. And then why do they meet and why do they intersect? And there's that whole question of serendipity and of coincidence and all the epiphanies that happen as the pattern actually reveals itself in this tapestry of being and of story. So this whole book is a tapestry, and as you read it, you start to see all the points of connection. So even the reader themselves becomes the weaver, becomes the story weaver. And there are characters in the book, and one of them is Kalea, who weaves the stories together, who sees all the patterns, who literally can like have eyes open in the manifest world and the physical world and see all these threads, the sacred geometry of everything, how it's all connected in the seeming chaos. There are other characters in the books too that have a lexicon, I call them multilingual. And it's not just spoken language, it's languages of, and it's not just body language, all the senses, there's like expression and all that kind of stuff. But there's also other languages and decoding and recoding and all kinds of things that happen throughout the books too in relation to that, and how we tell the stories and the language with which we have, like the tools we have developed so far to be able to do that. And yeah, learning to speak new languages. So, okay, I digress. So we've got the story makers. We have the story weavers, weaving those stories together, how they intersect, making the connections. So seeing the connections, really, like they make them, but only because they exist already, right? And then we've got the story keepers, like the elders, the people that hold those stories close and they tell them, but they keep them. There's legacy involved, and the storytellers are like, the beginners in this, like starting to tell the stories and share them, like Finn. So I parsed those out because I didn't know which word to choose, and I thought that there was one, but there isn't. They all have a different role. Yeah, and this whole concept of story, of where we make our meaning. And then, when we have meaning, things matter to us, and what matters becomes matter. It's what we create. Becomes literally, physically manifested. What matters to us matters, becomes matter. Okay, so I don't know. I think that's all I want to say about that. It's really useful for me to just like verbalize this, and I'm really it's really fun to share it excuse me, with anybody who is interested, and I'm hoping that some way down the line, years from now, people will listen to this and go, that was freaking cool, like how that thought process went to create these books I'm reading right now in my hands, that I'm reading to myself, curled up with some hot cocoa, which I drink a lot of cacao every morning. It's like my favorite thing, to open up my heart and my big mind, my capital M mind, to this consciousness that wants to flow through me, these stories that want to flow through me. Or people who are reading it to their kids, most of it you can read to your kids. Or just sharing it, giving it as gifts. I just got this as a gift. Like I'm really, really, really putting out into the world in vibration, that this reaches you, and that you're really enjoying the unpacking of how it was created. So thank you for playing. In case you are intrigued, here's a bit about the series. In the Veil's Edge fantastical, fantasy, magical realism series of 7 books, Carla Atherton, that's me, weaves together everything from ancient and mystic wisdom, cosmology, the internal sciences, and mythology with the real-world social issues we face today, to create a more beautiful world, not built on limited expectations, but the possibilities for both the stories we tell and the stories we live. The books take readers on a wild and inspired ride through humanity, possibility, passion, and purpose. They will leave you laughing, dancing, crying, singing, and utterly transformed. They are a prayer, a kiss on the wind, an apology, a love story reimagined, rewritten for my own family, for myself, for us all, for you.